The sheriff's cruiser kicked up a cloud of dust as it pulled into my driveway, and I knew Karen Williamson had finally done it. She'd crossed the line from neighborhood nuisance to something far more dangerous. What she didn't know was that her little power trip was about to backfire in the most spectacular way imaginable. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've owned Copper Ridge Ranch for 15 years. It's a beautiful 847-acre spread in northern Colorado, with rolling hills dotted by ancient oak trees and a creek that runs crystal clear even in the driest summers. I inherited it from my grandfather, along with his cattle operation and a deep love for this land that's been in our family since 1952. The ranch sits in what used to be pure countryside, but over the past decade, developers had been nibbling away at the edges of our rural paradise. 3 years ago, they built Meadowbrook Estates, a fancy subdivision of cookie-cutter McMansions with perfectly manicured lawns and homeowner association rules thicker than a phone book. The HOA president was Karen Williamson, a woman in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair pulled into a perpetual bun and the kind of pinched expression that suggested she'd been sucking on lemons since birth. She wore her authority like armor, clutching a clipboard everywhere she went and speaking in the clipped, authoritative tone of someone who'd never been told no in her adult life. Karen had made it clear from day one that my ranch was an eyesore that brought down property values. She'd complained to the county about everything from my cattle wandering too close to the fence line to the unsightly hay bales I stored in my south pasture. But I'd been here first. My grandfather had been here first, and I had every legal right to run my operation exactly as I pleased. Or so I thought. But what I didn't know was that Karen had been studying the property surveys with the obsessive focus of a general planning and invasion.it was a Tuesday morning in early September when everything started. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and I was fixing a section of fence where my neighbor's bull had gotten a little too frisky with the wire. I was hammering in a new post when I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. "Excuse me." I turned to see Karen marching across the field, her sensible walking shoes clicking against the scattered rocks. She was wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly feed bill, and she was clutching that infamous clipboard like a weapon. "Morning, Karen," I said, not bothering to stop working. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I need to inform you that you are currently trespassing on Meadowbrook Estates property." I stopped mid-swing and looked at her. "Come again?" She held up a rolled paper with a flourish. "I have here the official property survey conducted by Henderson and Associates. This fence line," she gestured dramatically, "is approximately 15 feet inside our community boundaries." The morning sun caught the smug satisfaction in her eyes as she continued. "According to HOA regulations, any unauthorized structures must be removed within 30 days, or will be forced to take legal action." I set down my hammer and wiped the sweat from my forehead. "Karen, my family has owned this land since before you were born. This fence has been here for 40 years. Property lines don't lie, Mr. Morrison." She handed me a copy of the survey with the kind of theatrical gesture you'd expect from someone serving divorce papers. "Perhaps your family made an honest mistake decades ago, but it's time to correct it." I unrolled the paper and studied it. The survey looked official enough, with all the right stamps and signatures. According to their measurements, a significant chunk of my south pasture, including the section I was working on, belonged to the HOA. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "I'm sure it's quite a shock," Karen said, and I could hear the fake sympathy dripping from her words like honey from a broken jar. "But facts are facts. I'm giving you fair warning out of neighborly courtesy." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Morrison? Your cattle have been grazing on our land for who knows how long. We'll need to discuss compensation for that as well." As I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the hard-packed earth, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just about a fence line, but what I didn't realize was that she'd already filed a formal complaint with the county, and the wheels of bureaucracy were already turning against me. 2 days later, I was in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and going through the mail when I saw the official envelope from Boulder County Planning and Zoning. My stomach dropped even before I opened it. "Notice of violation," it read in bold letters across the top. The letter informed me that I had 30 days to remove unauthorized structures from property belonging to Meadowbrook Estates, HOA, including approximately 400 feet of fencing and 2 cattle watering stations. Failure to comply would result in fines of $500 per day. I read it twice, then called my lawyer, Tom Bradley. Tom had handled my grandfather's estate and knew our property better than anyone. "Jake," he said, after I'd explained the situation, "I need to see that survey. Something doesn't smell right." An hour later, Tom was sitting at my kitchen table, studying the Meadowbrook survey alongside our original property deed from 1952. He was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the methodical patience of someone who'd spent 40 years untangling legal knots. "This is interesting," he said finally, tapping the survey with his pen. "Henderson and Associates is a reputable firm, but look at this reference point here." He pointed to a corner of the map where the surveyors had marked an old stone boundary marker. "They're using the Miller property corner as their starting point, but that marker was moved in 1987 during a road expansion project. It's about 20 feet off from where it should be." "So the survey is wrong?" "Potentially, but proving it will take time and money. I'll need to hire our own surveyor and do a complete historical property analysis." He looked up at me seriously. "This could get expensive, Jake. And in the meantime, you're still facing those county violations." That afternoon, I decided to try the direct approach. I walked across the field to Karen's house, a massive colonial with white columns and a lawn so perfect it looked like green carpet. She answered the door wearing a pink cardigan and an expression of mild annoyance, as if my presence was an unwelcome interruption to her day. "Mr. Morrison, I assume you're here about the survey." "I think there might be an error," I said, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. "My lawyer thinks the reference points might be off." Karen's smile was colder than a January morning. "Mr. Morrison, I hired the most respected surveying firm in the county. Are you suggesting they don't know how to do their job?" "I'm suggesting that mistakes happen. Maybe we could work together to get this sorted out properly." She crossed her arms. "The survey is accurate. The property belongs to our community. And frankly, your refusal to accept that fact is becoming quite tiresome. Karen, be reasonable. My family has farmed this land for 70 years. And now it's time for progress," she said. "Meadowbrook Estates represents the future of this area. Responsible development, maintain property values, community standards." Her voice took on a lecturing tone that made my jaw clench. "Perhaps it's time you considered selling your remaining property to developers who understand how to use land properly." I felt my temper starting to rise, but I kept it in check. "I'm not selling." "Well then, you'll remove your illegal structures, or the county will remove them for you." She started to close the door, then paused. "Oh, and Mr. Morrison? I've contacted the state agricultural department about your cattle operation. Apparently, there are quite a few regulations about livestock proximity to residential areas that you might not be aware of." The door clicked shut, leaving me standing on her perfect porch with my hands clenched into fists. But as I walked back across the disputed land, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's confidence seemed awfully specific, like she knew something I didn't. The agricultural inspector showed up on a Thursday morning while I was mucking out the barn. He was a young guy named Peterson, probably fresh out of college, with a nervous energy and a stack of clipboards that rivaled Karen's collection. "Mr. Morrison? I'm here about a complaint regarding livestock management practices." For the next 3 hours, Peterson measured distances between my cattle enclosures and the property line, tested water quality in my stock ponds, and documented every aspect of my operation with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigator. "Everything looks good," he said finally, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Your operation exceeds state standards in every category. So what's the problem?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the complaint alleged that your cattle were grazing within 50 feet of residential property lines, which would be a violation. But according to my measurements, your nearest cattle are at least 200 feet from the Meadowbrook boundary." "Unless you're using their property survey," I said slowly. Yes, actually." The complaint included a survey showing encroachment. He flipped through his papers. "But your fence line doesn't match their survey at all." Peterson left without issuing any violations, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Someone had filed a complaint using false information, and we both knew who that someone was. That evening, I was repairing a water trough when I heard vehicles approaching. 3 cars pulled into my driveway: Karen's white Lexus, a county code enforcement truck, and a police cruiser. My heart started pounding as I walked toward them. Karen emerged from her car wearing a navy business suit and carrying a leather briefcase, looking like she was headed to court rather than a cattle ranch. The code enforcement officer was a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, who I dealt with before on minor permits. He gave me an apologetic shrug as Karen began her performance. "Officer Martinez," she said to the deputy, "this is the trespassing situation I described." Deputy Martinez was young, probably new to the job, and he looked about as comfortable as a fish in a tree. "Ma'am, this appears to be a civil property dispute, not a criminal matter." "Trespassing is a criminal matter," Karen insisted. "Mr. Morrison has refused repeated requests to remove his illegal structures from our community property." Rodriguez stepped forward. "Jake, I've got to ask, do you have documentation showing this is your land?" I pulled out the folded copy of my property deed. Same deed my family's had since 1952. Karen opened her briefcase with a dramatic flourish. "And here is the certified survey showing that fence line is on Meadowbrook property." She handed copies to both officials. "Conducted by Henderson and Associates, just last month." Rodriguez studied both documents, his brow furrowed. "This is confusing. These 2 documents show completely different boundary lines." "Which is why I filed for an emergency injunction," Karen said smoothly. The words hit me like a physical blow. What?" She smiled that cold, satisfied smile. "Emergency court order to halt all activity on disputed property until the boundary can be legally resolved. The hearing is scheduled for Monday morning." Deputy Martinez looked relieved to have an excuse to leave. "Sounds like something for the courts to decide. Why all have a good evening." As the vehicles pulled away, I stood in my driveway, feeling like I'd just been hit by a truck. An injunction could shut down my entire operation. If I couldn't use that pasture, I'd have nowhere to rotate my cattle. It could financially ruin me within a month. But as I watched Karen's taillights disappear down the road, I noticed something interesting. She'd been awfully prepared with that injunction paperwork, almost like she'd filed it before our conversation even started. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, with the kind of persistent Colorado rain that turns dirt roads to mud and makes everything smell like wet earth. I met Tom at the courthouse steps, both of us wearing our best suits and carrying briefcases full of documents. "I've got good news and bad news," Tom said as we climbed the steps. "The good news is I found the original 1,952 survey markers. The bad news is They're buried under 3 feet of sediment from decades of erosion. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly green. Judge Patricia Williams was a stern woman in her 60s who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on a Monday morning. Karen entered with an attorney I didn't recognize, a sharp-dressed woman in her 40s who moved with the calculated precision of a shark. They took their seats across from us, and I could feel Karen's satisfaction radiating across the room like heat from a campfire. "Your Honor," Karen's lawyer began, "this is a straightforward property dispute. My client has provided a certified survey, clearly showing encroachment by Mr. Morrison's cattle operation." Judge Williams examined the survey documents. "Mr. Bradley, what's your client's position?" Tom stood up, every inch the experienced country lawyer. "Your Honor, we believe the survey is fundamentally flawed. The Meadowbrook survey uses reference points that were moved decades ago. We're requesting time to conduct our own survey." "How much time?" "60 days, Your Honor." Karen's attorney jumped up. "Your Honor, my client shouldn't have to wait 2 months to reclaim her community's property. Mr. Morrison has had ample time to research his boundaries." "The Morrison family has farmed this land for 70 years, Tom replied. "They've never had reason to question boundaries that were established by professional surveyors in 1952. Judge Williams looked tired. "Here's what I'm going to do. Mr. Morrison, you can continue current operations on the disputed property for 30 days. During that time, both parties will conduct independent surveys. We'll reconvene in 30 days to review the findings." It wasn't the total victory Karen had hoped for, but it wasn't the disaster I'd feared either. As we filed out of the courtroom, Karen caught up to me in the hallway. "You're only delaying the inevitable," she said quietly. "I have resources you can't imagine, and I will not let your little farm drag down our community's property values." "It's not a farm, Karen. It's a ranch. There's a difference." Her smile was arctic. "Not for much longer." That afternoon, I met with Jim Harrison, the surveyor Tom had recommended. Jim was an old-timer who'd been mapping Colorado properties for 30 years, with weather-beaten hands and eyes that missed nothing. "I've heard about this Meadowbrook situation," he said as we walked the disputed boundary. "Karen Williamson's been making noise about it all over the county." "What kind of noise?" "Oh, the usual. Talking about how cattle operations don't belong near residential areas. How the county needs to be more aggressive about enforcing zoning laws." He knelt down near where I'd been working on the fence. "But here's the interesting thing, she's been asking very specific questions about historical property markers." "What do you mean?" Jim stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. "About 6 months ago, she hired 3 different surveyors to look at this area. Not just Henderson and Associates. 3 different firms." My blood ran cold. Why would she do that? "Well, if I was a suspicious man," Jim said slowly, "I might think she was shopping around until she found someone who would give her the answer she wanted." As we walked back toward my truck, the implications of what Jim had said were sinking in. Karen hadn't stumbled across a property dispute, she'd been planning this for months. But what I still didn't understand was why she was so determined to get her hands on a piece of ranch land that would be useless to a residential development. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and my grandfather's old property files spread across the table. There had to be something I was missing, some reason Karen was so focused on that particular piece of land. I pulled out the original 1952 deed and studied it with fresh eyes. The legal description was written in the flowery language of mid-century bureaucracy, full of references to chains and links and compass bearings from landmarks that no longer existed. Then I saw it. Buried in the middle of the property description was a phrase I'd never paid attention to, including all mineral and water rights appertinent to said property. Mineral rights. Water rights. I grabbed my laptop and started searching for recent geological surveys of the area. It took me 2 hours of digging through county records, but finally I found it, a Colorado Geological Survey report from 18 months ago that identified significant groundwater reserves beneath what was now the disputed boundary area. My hands were shaking as I called Tom. Tom, I think I know what this is really about. The water rights, Tom. She's not after the land, she's after the water rights. There was a long pause. Are you sure? The State Geological Survey shows major aquifers right under the disputed area. If Meadowbrook Estates is growing, they're going to need water. A lot of water. And if they can prove they own that land, they get the water rights that go with it. I felt pieces clicking into place in my mind. Tom, what if the whole development was planned around getting access to our water? That's a serious accusation, Jake. It's the only thing that makes sense. Why else would she care about a strip of ranch land that's useless for development? The next morning, I drove to the county assessor's office and requested copies of all property transfers in the area over the past 5 years. What I found made my blood boil. Meadowbrook Estates hadn't just been built randomly in our rural area. The development had been carefully positioned to surround 3 sides of my ranch, with the 4th side blocked by protected wetlands. If they could prove ownership of the disputed boundary area, they'd effectively have me boxed in. But more importantly, the original development permits showed water usage projections that were impossibly low for a community of 200 homes. They'd always planned to get water from somewhere else, from my ranch. But when I tried to dig deeper into the financing behind Meadowbrook Estates, I hit a wall of shell companies and legal entities that would take weeks to untangle. And I was running out of time. With 2 weeks left until our court date, I decided to try a different approach. If Karen was really after the water rights, maybe I could use that knowledge to my advantage. I called her and asked if we could meet to discuss a settlement. "How generous of you to finally see reason," she said over the phone. "I'll be at the Meadowbrook Community Center tomorrow at 2 p.m. The community center was exactly what you'd expect from an upscale HOA, all glass and stone, with abstract art on the walls and furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Karen was waiting in a conference room with her lawyer and 3 other people I didn't recognize. "Mr. Morrison," Karen said, gesturing to the empty chairs across from them, "I'd like you to meet the Meadowbrook HOA Board of Directors." The introductions were brief and formal. Board members Susan Chen, Robert Hayes, and David Martinez all had the well-fed look of successful professionals who treated HOA business like a corporate boardroom. So, Karen said, once everyone was seated, "Are you ready to discuss terms for removing your structures from our property?" "Actually," I said, "I wanted to talk about water." The room went dead silent. Karen's poker face was impressive, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes. "Water?" she said carefully. "Yeah, I've been thinking about your development's water needs. 200 homes, full irrigation systems for all those perfect lawns. That's got to be expensive, trucking water in from the municipal system." "Our water infrastructure is perfectly adequate," Robert Hayes said quickly. "I'm sure it is. But I was wondering if we were to reach some kind of settlement agreement, maybe there would be opportunities for cooperation. Shared resources, that kind of thing." Karen leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing?" This was the moment of truth. "Well, I've got water rights on my property. Good water, clean aquifers. If Meadowbrook needed additional water access, we might be able to work out some kind of arrangement." The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Karen smiled, and I knew I had her. "That's an interesting proposal," she said. "Of course, any water sharing agreement would need to be based on accurate property boundaries. Of course. And it would need to be a long-term arrangement, something that would survive any future property transfers." Naturally, Karen exchanged glances with her lawyer. Perhaps we should table the boundary dispute while we explore this water arrangement. I'd need to see documentation of your water rights, flow rates, quality tests, that sort of thing. I can get you all of that. As I walked out of the community center, I felt like I was finally one step ahead. Karen had just confirmed everything I suspected. This was about water, not land. But what I didn't realize was that she was already 2 steps ahead of me. 3 days later, I was in my barn, treating a calf with a minor injury, when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the barn window, I could see 2 men in suits walking toward the house. By the time I reached them, they were already knocking on my door. "Mr. Morrison? I am Agent David Chen with the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. This is Agent Sarah Williams. We'd like to ask you a few questions about water rights fraud." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Water rights fraud? May we come in? I led them to the kitchen, my mind racing. Agent Chen was a compact Asian man with the kind of calm demeanor that suggested he'd seen everything. Agent Williams was tall and blonde, with sharp eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of my home. "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen began, "we've received reports that you may be involved in an illegal scheme to sell water rights that don't actually belong to you." "What? That's ridiculous?" Agent Williams opened a briefcase and pulled out a folder. "We have documentation showing that you recently offered to sell water access to Meadowbrook Estates, despite knowing that the water sources are located on disputed property." My stomach dropped. I never offered to sell anything. I mentioned the possibility of cooperation, but— "Mr. Morrison," Agent Chen interrupted, "fraud involving water rights is a serious federal offense, particularly in Colorado, where water law is strictly regulated." They had recordings. Somehow, Karen had recorded our conversation at the community center, but the audio had been edited to make it sound like I was offering to sell water rights I knew I didn't own. "This is insane," I said. "Karen Williamson is trying to steal my property, and now she's accusing me of fraud?" "Mrs. Williamson has provided us with extensive documentation," Agent Williams said, "including communications where you acknowledged that the property boundaries were in dispute." They questioned me for 2 hours. By the time they left, I felt like I'd been put through a meat grinder. They didn't arrest me, but they made it clear that the investigation was ongoing. As soon as their car disappeared down my driveway, I called Tom. "They what?" He exploded. "Karen set me up, Tom. She recorded our settlement meeting and edited it to make me sound like a criminal." "This is escalating beyond a simple property dispute," Tom said grimly. "If they're bringing federal agents into this, Karen has serious backing." "What kind of backing?" "The kind that has connections at the state level." "Jake, I think you're dealing with more than just an overzealous HOA president." That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and tried to make sense of what was happening. In the space of 6 weeks, I'd gone from a simple boundary dispute to facing potential federal fraud charges. Karen wasn't just trying to steal my land, she was trying to destroy my life. But there was something about the federal agent's visit that bothered me beyond the obvious. Agent Chen had mentioned extensive documentation from Karen. What kind of documentation? And more importantly, how had a suburban HOA president managed to get the attention of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation? The next morning, I woke up to find my cattle scattered across 3 different pastures and my main gate standing wide open. There were tire tracks in the mud, but no sign of who had opened it or why. It took me 4 hours to round up the herd, and by the time I was finished, I was exhausted, muddy, and furious. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my operation. I was hosing the mud off my boots when my neighbor, Frank Chavez, came walking across the field. Frank owned the property to the west of mine, a smaller ranch where he raised horses and minded his own business. Jake, you got a minute? Sure, Frank. What's up? I saw some unusual activity over here last night. Thought you should know. Frank was in his 70s, with a kind of weathered face that comes from a lifetime of outdoor work. He chose his words carefully, like a man who'd learned the value of thinking before speaking. What kind of activity? Well, around 2 a.m., I saw headlights in your south pasture. 2 vehicles, maybe 3. They were there for about an hour. Did you get a good look at them? Too far away to see much. But one of them looked like it might have been white. Expensive looking. A white Lexus, Karen. Frank, did you see anyone get out of the vehicles? Yeah, looked like they were doing something near your fence line. Had flashlights, equipment of some kind. Equipment? Looked like surveying gear to me. Tripods, measuring tools, that kind of thing. My blood ran cold. Frank, would you be willing to testify to what you saw? If it comes to that, sure. But Jake, he looked uncomfortable. There's something else. I got a visit yesterday from some folks claiming to represent a development company. They wanted to know if I'd be interested in selling my ranch. What did you tell them? I told them hell no, of course. But they seemed awfully confident that the area was going to be developed, whether I wanted to sell or not. After Frank left, I called Jim Harrison, my surveyor. Jim, I need to ask you something. If someone wanted to alter property boundary markers at night, how hard would that be? Well, that would be illegal as hell, for starters. But could it be done? There was a pause. Jake, are you suggesting someone tampered with your boundary markers? I'm not sure what I'm suggesting, but I need to know if it's possible. With the right equipment and knowledge? Sure, especially if they knew where the original markers were located. Move a marker stone a few feet, alter the GPS coordinates in the survey database. It would be hard to detect unless you knew exactly what to look for. And if someone did that, any survey based on the altered markers would be wrong. But it would look completely legitimate unless you had the original reference points to compare it to. I felt like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle were finally starting to fit together. Karen hadn't just hired multiple surveyors to shop for favorable results. She'd altered the evidence to create favorable results. Jim, I need you to do something for me. I need you to survey the disputed boundary using the original 1,952 reference points, not the current markers, the original ones. Jake, finding 70-year-old reference points is going to be like finding needles in a haystack. My grandfather's survey notes are in the county archives. They show exact measurements from landmarks that still exist. This is going to be expensive and time-consuming. Jim, I think Karen Williamson has been systematically altering property boundaries to facilitate a massive land grab. If I'm right, my ranch is just the beginning. But even as I said it, I realized that I still didn't understand the full scope of what Karen was planning or who was helping her do it. Jim's historical survey took 5 days of meticulous work, measuring angles and distances from rock formations and old fence posts that had survived since my grandfather's time. When he finished, the results were even more shocking than I'd expected. Jake, you need to see this. We were standing in my kitchen, looking at 2 survey maps side by side. The difference was dramatic. According to the original 1,952 boundaries, Jim said, not only does all the disputed land belong to you, but Meadowbrook Estates actually built their community center and half their homes on your property. I stared at the map, hardly believing what I was seeing. Are you sure? Dead certain. The original property markers were moved approximately 40 feet east, sometime in the last few years, probably during the initial development of Meadowbrook Estates. So Karen doesn't just want my land, she's already stolen it? That's exactly what I'm saying. And if my calculations are correct, Meadowbrook Estates owes you about 3 years of rent on roughly 30 acres of property. The implications hit me like an avalanche. Karen wasn't just an overzealous HOA president, she was part of a massive fraud. The entire development had been built on stolen land, and now she was trying to legitimize the theft through legal manipulation. I called Tom immediately. "Tom, you need to get down here right now and bring a criminal lawyer." While I waited for Tom to arrive, I did some more research into Meadowbrook Estates' ownership structure. What I found made my head spin. The development wasn't owned by a local company. It was owned by Mountain Vista Holdings, which was owned by Colorado Premier Developments, which was owned by Western States Investment Group. And buried deep in the corporate filings was a name that made everything click into place: Williamson Family Trust. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. Her family owned the entire development. Tom arrived with a criminal attorney named Rebecca Martinez, a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in real estate fraud. After I'd explained everything, she sat quietly for a long moment, studying the survey maps and corporate documents. "Mr. Morrison," she said finally, "if what you're telling me is true, we're looking at one of the most sophisticated real estate frauds I've ever seen." Sophisticated how? Think about it. They buy cheap rural land, alter the property boundaries to steal additional acreage from neighboring properties, build a development on the stolen land, then use the HOA structure to legitimize their ownership through legal challenges. And if anyone fights back, they use their resources to crush the opposition through federal investigations, legal costs, and bureaucratic harassment. Rebecca shook her head. "It's brilliant, in a sociopathic way. So what do? We file criminal charges. Real estate fraud, conspiracy, theft by deception, we throw the book at them. But first, we needed more evidence." "I have an idea," I said. "But it's going to require some acting on my part." The next morning, I called Karen and asked for another settlement meeting. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "I heard about your visit from federal investigators. I do hope you're not in too much trouble. Actually, that's what I wanted to discuss. I think we need to reach an agreement quickly before this situation gets any worse." "I see. And what kind of agreement did you have in mind?" "Complete surrender. I'll deed over the disputed property to Meadowbrook Estates, no questions asked. In exchange, I want assurance that the fraud investigation will be dropped." There was a long pause. "That's a very reasonable proposal. I just want this nightmare to end, Karen. I can't afford to fight you anymore." We arranged to meet at the community center that afternoon. What Karen didn't know was that Rebecca Martinez and a team of investigators would be monitoring the conversation from a van parked outside. I arrived at the community center wearing a wire and carrying a briefcase full of fake documents. Karen was waiting with her usual entourage, her lawyer, the HOA board, and 2 new faces I didn't recognize. "Mr. Morrison," Karen said, standing to shake my hand, "I'm so glad you've decided to be reasonable." "I don't have much choice, do I?" Karen's smile was triumphant. "Sometimes, the smart thing is to know when you're beaten." "Before we sign anything," I said, "I need to know that the federal investigation will go away." "Oh, I think once you deed over the property and acknowledge that you made some mistakes about water rights, the investigators will find more pressing matters to pursue." "You can guarantee that?" Karen exchanged a look with one of the men I didn't recognize. "Let's just say I have friends in the right places." I pulled out the fake deed transfer documents. "I'll sign this, but I want something in writing about the investigation." "Mr. Morrison," said Karen's lawyer, "we can't control federal investigations." "But you can influence them," I pressed. "Karen just said she has friends in the right places." Karen held up a hand to silence her lawyer. "What exactly do you want?" I want to know how this whole thing really works. How you can guarantee the investigation goes away. How you manage to get federal agents to take your word over mine." Karen's confidence was intoxicating. She leaned back in her chair like a queen holding court. "Mr. Morrison, you have no idea how business really works at this level. When you're developing a project worth $50 million, you don't leave important details to chance." "What kind of details?" "Regulatory approvals, zoning variances, water rights." She gestured broadly. "Property boundaries." "Are you saying you knew the boundaries were wrong when you built Meadowbrook?" Karen laughed. "Wrong? Mr. Morrison, boundaries are just lines on a map. They can be adjusted when necessary." One of the new faces, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit, looked uncomfortable. "Karen, maybe we